Okay, I think we're up and running. Last week, we talked about the fact that in the book of James, he is challenging us to live out our Christian values in the midst of difficult relationships in the church and outside of the church. And in thinking about that, which we all face those things, we talked about asking for God's wisdom and what that means. We focused on this passage last week. If we're facing relationship difficulties and we ask for God's wisdom, verse 5, let him ask in faith or trust with no doubting. We talked about the fact that that word means uncertainty, wavering. It means I kind of want God's wisdom, but I really want God's wisdom if it'll prove my own case and make me feel justified in whatever I'm doing. I'm not sure I really want God's wisdom to what he has to say, especially if it convicts me and makes me have to change my own behavior, see? And so he talks about being like a wave of the sea. This wave pushes you in the direction of saying, well, yeah, I really want to hear what God has to say, but then this wave pushes you and says, but I want to find the scriptures that justify what I'm doing. I really don't want to hear the whole story. And so as verse 8 says, that kind of a person is dipsukos. He's a double-minded. He or she is really not certain that they really want to hear what God has to say to them, and that they're really submissive to what God has to say to them. See, if that's where we are when we pray for wisdom, then we're not really being open to God's wisdom as it's revealed to us in the Word. So that was our challenge last week, to make sure that when we ask for that wisdom in whatever relationships we're dealing with, that we really want to hear what God says and not just justify the way we feel at a given place, okay? So we're going to shift gears a little bit today as the text of James proceeds. We're going to talk about ways in which the perceptions of ourselves and others can influence our relationships. Now think about this. Every one of us has a self-image, a self-concept, right? And often our self-concepts are formed in the way we compare ourselves to others. True or false? Okay. Now the Bible talks about the fact that that's not very good wisdom, but still that's what we do, all right? So if I perceive myself in a certain way, I may assume that other people see me in that same way. See, if I perceive myself in some negative way, I may assume wrongly that other people see me in that way. See, conversely, if I think I'm all that and everybody should love me, I may think that everybody feels that way. See, so the way we perceive ourselves can definitely affect the way we relate to others, whether openly or defensively or whatever. You understand what I'm saying? Okay. So in the context of the book of James, in this particular books, James is talking about people who fit in different economic classes. He's talking about the rich and the poor. And, you know, all of us in this room right now have an idea about ourselves, and we say in our own heads to ourselves, well, I'm poor, or I'm rich, or something in between, or I belong with this group, I don't belong with that group, you know. We tend to categorize ourselves in these categories. Sometimes the categories are presented to us in media and in other places as dichotomies. Let me explain what I mean. The rich and the poor. Now that sounds good, but that's kind of ridiculous. I was talking to a guy this week about averages. And you know what a bell curve is, okay? Well, of all the people in the United States, how many are there? I don't know, 250, 300 million, I don't know. But those 300 million people don't fit into two distinct categories. Are you with me? They're along a long, gradual continuum at every point on the economic scale, right? And so just talking about rich and poor presents an idea which is not exactly correct in the first place, right? Okay? And wherever you are on that continuum, you're comparing yourselves to people below you and above you, and so your perspective on that is different than somebody else's that's on a different point on that continuum. Are we all together on this? Okay. So I don't know how many of you are like old fuddy-duddies like Cindy and I, but I know Andy and Pam liked Downton Abbey. How many of you watched Downton Abbey? Okay, you even did. I'm shocked. That's great. But Downton Abbey was a show, and some of y'all that haven't watched it, you would like it if you can find it on old stuff. But it is a very interesting character profile of late 19th, early 20th century England with the super rich and the servants of the super rich, the people that lived in the upstairs in luxury, the people that served them in the downstairs, you know. And it's a classic literary depiction of the rich and the poor. But the interesting thing about this show is it shows how that all of them are real people, and sometimes they reach across the gap to each other, and they're sensitive to each other. Sometimes they resent each other. Sometimes they misunderstand each other. You know, it's interesting from that standpoint because it brings out all these subtle little conflicts between people that perceive themselves in these different categories. However, if you were in England today, or even back then, but especially today, the continuum is like it is here. It's not going to be that that people are either way down here or way up here. They're on a continuum all the way along the line. And the picture that's given to us by the media that wants us to categorize ourselves in this category or this category is really a false dichotomy. It's a false dichotomy. And why am I getting into this? What has this got to do with anything? Because in the book of James, we have a conflict going on between the owners of everything and the people that work for them, okay? And we would say the rich and the poor, all right? And their conception of themselves and how they're being mistreated from one side or the other and what is right and everything gets involved in this, see? And today, in our country, this false dichotomy is being pushed all the time as if it's a reality. You're either here or you're here, see? And it's being pushed on us continually. And even in the church, it causes us to separate ourselves from one another sometimes. And it causes difficulty in relationships. So let's do a little study here. And I had one that was a little later than this. Credit Suisse, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Brandon would probably tell us. But this is a global wealth report from 2021. There was another one from 2022 that I couldn't get copied, but it was almost identical to this, very little change. There was another one from 2023, and it was virtually identical to this, okay, with a tiny point or two percentage difference in the different categories. So let me explain what this is. This says that you are in the top 1% of wealth globally. That's globally would be, what do we got, 8 billion people or something, or maybe more than that? I can't remember the numbers today. But 8 billion people, if you have $1 million, you're in the top 1% of that 8 billion people. Now, I don't know, all you math people like, Miss Rash could tell us what that 1% is right now if we round it off. I probably should be able to, but I'm not that smart. But it's a very tiny portion, but there's still a lot of people. But there's still a lot of room in that top group, because if you're, I don't know if it means you've got $1 million cash or just liquid assets right there, or if you've got a net worth of $1 million, but whatever it means, okay? Do you understand what I'm talking about, Brandon? Yes, Brandon's, yeah, he's laughing at me. Okay, so I don't know what that means, but between a person that has a net worth of $1 million to those that have billions and billions of dollars, even in that 1%, there's a vast expanse of people. And the people at the very top of that list own most of the wealth in that 1% category, okay? Now, let's just say your net worth is between $100,000 and $1 million, okay? Well, then you are in the top 10% of the richest people on the planet. That's not in the United States. That's in the entire planet, okay? Let's say that your net worth is between $10,000 and $100,000, okay? That's like if you paid off all your debts and you sold everything you had, you'd have, if that's it, then you're still in the top 50% of all humanity on the planet. What does that make us in here? Yeah, if we're going to compare ourselves to all the people on the planet, this is a filthy rich group of people in this room. All right? So, again, Justin and I have talked about perceptions. And our perceptions of ourselves and others affect the way we think about ourselves and affect the way we think about others. People who live in the favelas in Sorocaba, Brazil, or in the slums of Nandigama, India, or some of those different places, if they came here, they would certainly view us from a different perspective than we view ourselves, right? Obviously, they would. Okay, so here we are in our setting. Here were the people in the setting that James was writing to a long time ago. And there were Christians who, by comparing themselves, thought, well, he's in that category and I'm in that category, and my interests conflict with his interests, and they had suspicions about each other, and they had trouble viewing themselves the way God views them. And so here we go. See, these are the things operating in our own thinking when it comes to these conflicts. So, who are you? How do you perceive yourself? Well, let's listen to James here in James chapter 1, verse 9. Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation. Well, if you keep reading through the book of James, the lowly brother is the one who would consider himself or herself poor. Okay? Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation. Well, how do you do that? Well, I'm blessed. I have a house, I have a bed, I have food, I have clothes, I have, God loves me, I'm a Christian, my sins are forgiven, I have heaven in my future. All those things could be things we could thank God for every day if we consider ourselves there. Let the rich boast in his humiliation. In other words, he could be thinking from a God perspective, I wouldn't have anything unless God had entrusted me with these things. And I'm blessed beyond what I'm worthy of. And he would be feeling the great responsibility of having that kind of resource and wealth and everything. So, you see, it depends on our perspective. Now, this perspective that James is trying to put out there for us is a godly perspective, whereas we were talking about a little bit ago, our perspective is not often formed this way. It's formed by doing what? I'm listening. Comparing ourselves to other people around us, right? That's what we tend to do. So he's saying, we ought to view ourselves, if we're going to relate properly to each other, in the same way that God views us. See, God sees the whole world. Do you believe that right now God can see every human being in every place, from every slum to every mansion to every gutter to every castle in the entire world, and sees them all at once? Absolutely. Knows their hearts and minds and experiences and everything. So he talks about the lowly brother and the rich, and he says the rich should boast in his, the word boast is carried over from verse 1, in his humiliation, because like a flower of the grass, he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass. Its flower falls and its beauty perishes. So the rich man will fade away in the midst of his pursuits. And we can read cover to cover in the Bible about people who couldn't take it with them, right? There are entire psalms written about this, how that wealth is fleeting and all this kind of stuff. And it's only something that we're given to use in the present. All right. Now, Paul said this. He said, we do not dare to classify or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves. They are not wise. 2 Corinthians 10, verse 12. And yet we all admitted to each other a minute ago that this is exactly what we do, right? This is exactly what we do. As we form our self-concept, our self-image, the way we perceive ourselves, we're comparing ourselves with other people, probably certain other people, not all other people. We're all doing this, and then we're forming this self-concept, and that self-concept is giving us prejudices against the people with whom we're comparing ourselves, good or bad. All right, so see ourselves as God sees us. Now, how am I going to know how God sees me? There's only one way, and that's through His Word. What does He tell me over and over and over and over in His Word? That I am made in His image, that I am precious, that He loves me, that He knows every hair on my head, as few as they may be, that He knows everything about us, that He knows our thoughts, He knows our words before we speak them, and He still loves us and cares for us and everything. That, God, and it also tells me, remember, that whatever other person I'm thinking about, He also knows them and loves them and cares for them. See? And so when you realize that the same God that loves and cares for me cares for them, whoever they are, that puts a different spin on it, doesn't it? So we see ourselves, we try to see ourselves as God sees us. So what if somebody on a given day treats me in a way that hurts my feelings? Does that mean that God sees me as bad or something? No, not at all. What if somebody praises me extensively? Does that mean that's how God sees me? Not necessarily. Okay. So, self-perception was a problem in the book of James because people categorized themselves and they identified with a category and they were going to fight for that category because that's the category they put themselves in. Self-perception helps determine the social group in which we see ourselves. So now we're going to I thought if we're going to talk about this in this class, we might as well get practical nuts and bolts instead of just theory. How do we get this to work in our lives? So what group do you see yourself as belonging to? See, we have what's called a reference group. The reference group is not the group that you think you belong to. The reference group is the group to which you compare yourself and you think you don't belong to. So a lot of us would do something like this if it's economics. We would look at the very poor and we would use them as a reference group and say, I don't belong to that group. And we would look to the very wealthy and we would use them as a reference group and we would say, I don't belong to that group. And we would put ourselves in some other category in the middle and name it something, something that somebody has named it. And we would say, that's where I belong. There's also what's called the in group. And that's not exactly like the in crowd, what we speak of, but it's the social group in which we believe we belong. So what social group do you think you belong to? If you were to look at the people in this congregation, I'm not just talking about who are your friends, but what socioeconomic group do you think you belong to? The out group is the socioeconomic group, whichever direction it is that you think you do not belong to. So if you think you belong to a group, you perceive that you're similar to these people. If you think that you don't belong to a group, you perceive that you're dissimilar. You're not like these people. See, I'm not like that person. I'm not like that person. I'm like these people. Okay? That's your in group and your out groups. Okay? So, what we're talking about is how do we form these perceptions of ourselves based on different categories, like economic, like in the book of James? And what do they do to our own thinking? And what do they do to the thinking of the people that are interacting with us? Okay? So, we have perceptions. This doesn't have to be just economic. What about our perceptions of people in different religions? See, I'm in this group. See, I would say, if you ask me what group are you in, I'd say, well, I'm in fundamental biblical Christianity group. All right, so that being my self-perception, how do I perceive people who are in different groups? How do I perceive people in liberal mainline Protestantism? How do I see people in Islam and its different sections? How do I perceive people that are in Hinduism? How do I perceive people that are agnostics and atheists, etc.? So I think of my in-group and I think of the out-groups. Do I have prejudices relative to those other groups and how those people are? Yes. See? And it may affect the way I interact with them if I meet them different places. But how does God feel about them? How does God feel about me? How would God want me to interact with those people? Okay? How about people from different political parties? I shouldn't have even said this in an election year here, see? But we have certainly people from different political parties, which is fine in this congregation. But the media and everything around us builds huge prejudices in us, and we categorize ourselves, and it's like the dichotomy, conservative, liberal. Isn't that sort of like rich and poor? Isn't there a continuum that's very long and lengthy and diverse, that you can't, just like rich and poor, you can't just make them like this because there are elements of all of it in all of us? Right, see? But if we think of ourselves in this group and not that group and set ourselves against everybody in that group, then what are we inviting? Conflict and difficulty in relationships, oftentimes when it's completely unnecessary, okay? We've talked about the economic categories, ethnic groups. We still have prejudices, whether we admit it or not, between different ethnicities. And prejudice simply means not that you hate people, it means you have preconceived notions in your mind which cause you to make judgments about those people which very often are not true. See? And it certainly doesn't apply to all people who are in those ethnic categories, all right? Then we've got different environmental groups. You know, the climate change people, non-climate change people, everybody on the continuum all the way in between. We've got different moral choice groups. We've got those that believe in biblical sexuality, marriage, etc. And we've got those that believe that it's whatever you want it to be and embrace the LGBTQ community and whatever they want to do and all the in-betweens. See? So do we do the same thing? And the Bible classifies us there in different ways, but we have prejudices about people in those other groups which may or may not be true. Okay? I'm not justifying anybody's behavior. I'm just saying that when we classify ourselves and have a self-perception and we set ourselves against other groups, we often judge them in ways that's not fair. And it affects the way we interact to them personally. Okay. Now, so we talked first about seeing ourselves as God sees us. Now the difficult part is when we try to see other people as God sees them. Let's say other people are living lives of sin. Does that mean that God doesn't love them? Does that mean that God doesn't care for them or know everything about them or want them to be saved? No. They are important to God. See? And so when we think of anybody that we are in a relationship conflict with, I guess I could say with whom we might be in a relationship conflict, how does God see that person? Like if you're thinking about that person, think this way. How does God think about that person? If I were God and I were looking down on that person as I want God to look down on me, and if I want God to be merciful to me and that person wanted God to be merciful to them, how would God think of that person? Okay, so that helps me get a perspective on how I should behave toward these other people. So see, that gets me back to where we were a little while ago, right here. If I can start seeing myself like God sees me more, rather than comparing myself to other people, if I can start seeing the other people more like God sees them, see, without my prejudices, that will help me in relating to these people. Now, I'm curious as to some of your reactions to what I've been throwing out here this morning. Anybody? Does this make sense? See, we could just say in this class, okay, God says we're supposed to treat each other, love your neighbors yourself, and we could just leave it general like that. But to me, breaking it down into the actual relational elements helps me to see kind of how I need to move forward in loving my neighbor as myself. You or no? Yeah, Barry?
I think we get bogged down with past behaviors and we can't see people for what God sees them because they've messed up. We've seen them messed up. We feel like that they're maybe not worthy or maybe they're going to continue. But we don't see that. I think Paul, just think about Paul and the people who felt a little uneasy about Paul. When Paul first was converted and began teaching, they were scared of him.
Yeah.
Because of his reputation.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't call for a moment to see how God saw him. They were questioning.
So Barry's talking about our judgment of people based on their past behavior, and we've seen them behave badly. We've all behaved badly at times, right? I think when people continue to behave badly, that makes it difficult for us to trust those people. But should we ever refuse people the opportunity to earn trust by behaving better? And if people try to do better, should we encourage them in doing better? And yeah, so absolutely. Somebody else? Yeah, Keith? Yeah, Keith was talking about being in airports. For me, the airport in Charlotte is like that. How many of you been in the airport in Charlotte? Is that a mess or what? So, I mean, there is every person on earth in that airport. And they're all different, and they're all speaking different languages, and you feel that. But Keith said it helps him to remind himself when he's in that press of people, and they're all speaking different languages, and they're all different colors and shapes and sizes, that God loves them just like he loves me. And really, they're all just people with the same basic issues and problems that we have. All right? So, let me see. All right, we're going to try to see others as God sees them. So, as we wrap this up today, a lot of us, when we study James, we think, okay, James, you're all over the place, like you're ADHD. You start out saying, consider it joy that when you undergo trials, Then you switch subjects to, like, if you want to ask for wisdom, don't do it without being sure you want to hear it. And then you switch subjects again to talking about the rich. No, he's not doing that. What he's doing is he's starting out from the get-go and saying, you guys are in conflict with people that you think are different from you. You're in the midst of a trial. You should thank God for these trials, because they're going to make you better people. You need wisdom to get through this trial. You're having conflicts with people in the church, and you need God's wisdom to help you relate properly there. And then in verse 12, he says, blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. Now, some of your translations there will say patient. Some of them will say endures trial or endures temptation. The word temptation and the word trial are the same original word. Okay? Perasmos is the word, which means a temptation or a trial. But usually when we're in some stress or difficulty or trial, that's when we're most tempted, because that's when we're going to act out, especially in our relationships. It's when we're under pressure in those trials, okay? So when you're in this relationship trial or testing, be steadfast. Steadfast how? Well, steadfast in your Christianity, steadfast in your behavior, steadfast in the way you try to act in a Christian way. See? So be steadfast under trial, for when you have stood that test, you'll receive the crown of life. Standing the test means you go through this trial and you try your best to act like a Christian all the way through this trial. See, that's steadfastness. That's hanging on to what's most important in the midst of the trial. That's hanging on to a God perspective of yourself and a God perspective of the other people, and trying to do what you think who would want you to do. God would want you to do every step of the way through this trial, okay? So then he says, let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. So here I'm in this stressful situation, I'm in this conflict with these people, and you're blaming God for being in the situation. You're angry about the situation. It's God's fault. Why would God let me be in this situation? See? But he says, don't say that this is God's fault. And see, what's right under the surface of that is if God hadn't put me in this place, I wouldn't be acting like this. It's God's fault. Whose fault is it not in that scenario? It's not my fault. It's God's fault that he's put me in this scenario, see? So let no one say when he is tempted, I'm being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. God is good. God does not imagine evil. He does not want evil. He does not push you or I toward evil in any way. He does not goad us or push us toward sin in any possible way. See? So whoever you're going to blame it on, don't blame it on God. Okay? Because God does not tempt people. Each person is tempted. Now, again, most people when they read this, and it's fine to do this, they apply this to any temptation, anytime, anywhere, and it's valid. But I just want you to see that in the course of the book of James, he's talking about temptation in the midst of relationship trials. Okay? Each man is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own. Some of your translations say lust. Some of your translations say desire. Most of us today, when we hear the word lust, we think sex, right? Sexual. The word epithumia just means desire of any kind. Desire for food, desire for position, desire for power, desire for sex, desire for relationship, desire, whatever that is. It's not specific to sex. So desire is it just means wants, okay? So in the midst of this conflict between people, what do you want? What are your wants? See, that's an element in this. What do you really want out of this? Well, I want to win. I want recognition. I want to be justified in my behavior. I want all the people to be on my side and not on that side. See, that's your desires that he's dealing with. I don't want to be embarrassed like I was embarrassed, whatever it is. So we're tempted in these situations when we're drawn away by our own desire. And our own desire, see, it's pushing us. I got to have this result out of this. I want this. Maybe I want revenge. Maybe I want payback. You know, your own desire, when it has been conceived in your head, gives birth to sin. That means it gives birth to your bad behavior or my bad behavior in this situation. It's not my fault. It's God's fault, or it's their fault, or it's my mother's fault, or it's my father's fault, or it's the way I was brought up's fault, or something. But it's not my fault, see? But desire, my desire, what do I want? Gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's fully grown, brings forth death. Okay, we know this as a major principle. But how do we use this or think of this in the moment of relationship type conflicts? See, do we throw it all out then? Or is it still our guiding principle then? To me, this is just for my own self and my own thought processes, this consideration is valuable. You? It helps me think through it, not in a big general way that doesn't mean anything, but in a little step-by-step practical way where it means something in the moment in how I choose to behave. Okay? It's raining. We're going to get out a minute early, and you're happy and I'm happy. Thank you all for listening today. Brother Gene, you can go ahead. Yes, and Gene's comment is very good as we close. He says, when we're under these conditions, God is really giving us an opportunity to really shine in our Christianity if we take that opportunity. Okay, God bless.